Nobody told me leaving your home country and going to a new country would cost me myself. There is always a sense of feeling loneliness and feeling sadness when you first move, and we often think of it as a pretty normal adjustment period. But when it becomes long term, you are leaving your home country, staying in another country for a prolonged amount of time, the sense of feeling is actually grief. You might think grief is such a strong word. In my culture, we don't usually use grief unless we physically lost someone. However, when you are leaving home, you lost a lot of things. You lost a close friend circle who was always there to support you. When you're here during the day experiencing something, it might be their midnight and they will not be able to pick up a phone call from you. You lost the familiar boba shop, the restaurant that you always go to with your friends. You lost a community, you lost a closeness that you can just take a subway and go home to see your parents if you need to go back home. There are so many things that you lost. Yes, you didn't physically lose someone, but the distance itself is a huge loss. And when you're experiencing these loss, there is the feeling of grief. Because society doesn't usually recognize that grief, so it's called disenfranchised grief. Today we'll talk about this specific grief. How is it impacting those of us who are international student, immigrants, or expat? And how do we deal with the sense of grief when it's getting strong and causing us feel loss? Disenfranchised grief are losses that not usually openly recognized by the society because it's not considered something that's a standard or normal loss. People don't openly talk about it. We call it homesickness in general. That actually minimizes the impact of it. Disenfranchised grief can be very powerful because ultimately it is also a sense of grief. You didn't just lose everything that was in your home country. You also lost the connection to that you who was living in that country, that version of you. And that is exactly what happened to a lot of us who are living in a foreign country. When we look back at those time or even just having a phone call with your friends, you realize the way you talk, the energy level that you have, how you show up is so different from how you are showing up right now in this new environment. You're not just losing the support system, you're also losing the part of self, that essential identity that you've been growing up with for many, many years. It almost feels like this is a second version of you and you feel separated from the first version of you. And the two yous are just like twins. They're trying to get to each other, but there's not a chance for them to connect. And that's exactly why we feel this feeling of emptiness. We feel feeling of loneliness, confusion, lost when we are living in a new country. What do we do with it? Recognizing that you have this grief is the first step. We want to have the language for it. We name it and we validate this experience. It might seem naming and validating doesn't do much, but this is actually the start of the healing process. When you are able to name it, able to validate your own feeling, the heaviness actually disappears. It's easier for us to allow it to just be there. Naming the feeling is very powerful. It almost feels like you're unloading some of the weight that you've been carrying all along. You put it down and you look at it and say, okay, this is grief. This process can be very therapeutic itself. The difficult part of it is, for some of us, we think it is just a normal part of life. And when we say that, we are invalidating ourselves, making things even harder. So recognizing that this is a difficult moment, not everyone has the courage to move to a new country and start over building a new identity. You are letting your old self die, and we need to validate that. After validating it, we can create a ritual for us to celebrate the growth, celebrate your courage to be willing to let your old part, that safe part, die and come to a new place to start over. Maybe the ritual would look like listening to an inspiring music that you usually like in your home country's language, watching a TV show in your home country's language, talking to old friends who know you really well. And it can also look like occasionally look in the mirror and tell yourself that you're proud of yourself for trying, for coming to a new place. Pain always accompanies growth. It is a part of it. That's why we need to be gentle to ourselves. After talking about all this grief and the lost identity that you have, I'm curious about how is grief usually talked about in your home country? For me, it took me a long time to recognize the sense of grief because grief is such a heavy and formal word that we don't usually use it in this context. And the way your home country, your home culture see grief can heavily impact how you see grief. So share with me in a comment, how is grief talked about in your home country? And how are you experiencing this disenfranchised grief right now at this moment?